surprise for Professor Jones.
I hate surprises.
No, it's a nice surprise, or maybe even a shock. So this is our bare facts, everybody. You'll receive this shortly. Now, I know it's all back to from the camera, 32-page bumper mag. So page 30. All right. So there's Dr. David Jones and his book. So there you go. I will make sure that Linda or Alan sends you a copy, David.
Fantastic.
A hard copy. And one for your mommy as well. Yeah, I'm sure your mommy would like a coffee.
She's resolutely unimpressed by all of this. I have to say, actually, interestingly, I mean, the book, everyone know, well, a lot of people know the story behind it. It's something I decided to do. I'd always intended to do and did it during lockdown. What I have to say is I had a lot of people write to me after the book, and I'm putting them in the direction of the foundation. So I think it's a joining up exercise, so that it's there for people to as a resource for people to find out more about it. But people, you know, in a sense, if you enter into finding out more about PBC via Amazon, then you know, it's very, very important to connect everybody up. So I'm a little bit old-fashioned, I have to say. That may surprise you. But I actually think a book is useful. I think web pages and things are fine, but they're a bit here today and gone tomorrow. Whereas you know, a book is there and people can refer back to it. So thank you very much.
And, you know, other than reading online, and don't forget the Sjogren's syndrome, the eye things, because screens are a big issue for us. Even going to the pictures, the flicks, or television screens.
Yes.
So you heard it here first, everybody. Right, Professor, welcome. It's so lovely to see you again.
And it's nice, Robert not telling us off, so I can disappear off and talk about whatever I want.
Until Chris gets warmed
no quick fire round, no quick answers, no. I know he's going to come back on at some point and tell me off, but we could be here hours, couldn't we?
What's your finish time today, David?
I'm reasonably relaxed, let's say 3:15, but just something like that.
Right, because I've got to go back to Edinburgh to get our accounts signed by the accountants. Always busy. Okay, number one. I'm struggling to read my test results I had on the 14th of June. There's well over 30 different ones, and this lady says I'm clueless. So she's basically saying, what are the ones that I need, please? So that's pretty simple, that question.
Yeah, really, really good question. So what happens is, and I'm a big fan of transparency. So, you know, every so often we get, you know, somebody wants to have a look at their medical records and we get this sort of letter coming through, are you happy? There is nothing that would ever be in a set of records that we wouldn't be happy for somebody to see. Yeah. But what we always say to people is that it's in doctor speak, and it therefore is really helpful to be able to explain to people. And tests are a classic example of that, because in the UK they're done as panels. So that's because they're done on big computerized machines. So you order a set of blood tests, and in a sense all the tests come out. And so when you're not familiar with looking at those, you can have way too much information, much of which actually isn't relevant, but it's actually cheaper because the automated systems are very cheap. It's cheaper to run all the tests than it is to put an additional step to take some in and out. So people aren't fishing for things. It's just much more effective to do that. Yeah. And of course, what that can then do is also, we just touched on this a little bit, is come up with what we would call unexpected findings. So you find something that you weren't expecting to see. And we could maybe just touch on that in a second. Yeah. In PBC, essentially, there are 3 or 4 blood tests which are really important and which are the ones that we would look at. And these are the ones that people can track on the app. These are the ones that you need to know about that really dictate what we're doing. So the most important of these is the alkaline phosphatase. So that's the single test which is most important in PBC. So that is ALK-phos. It's alkaline phosphatase, sometimes called ALK-phos, sometimes abbreviated to ALP.
ALP, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that people often use. Now, this is an enzyme, it's a protein released by sick biliary epithelial cells. And so the sicker they are, the higher the blood level is, okay, in simple terms. Now, there are a couple of cautions with it. The first is it can also be released by bone. And so people with bone disease can have high alkaline phosphatase levels. So Paget disease classically does that. And the other one is that for very young people who are still growing, it's released by growing bones. So it's one of those things where you just got to be a little bit careful. But for the average PBC patient, it's a pretty good marker of where the disease is at. And basically today, you're looking for an alkaline phosphatase below 200 in simple terms. So 200 is the magic number. The upper limit of normal is 130. People below 200 are at a much, much lower risk. Above 200, you need to be aware of it. So in simple terms, look for your alkaline phosphatase, and it's got to be 200. We did some work. Jess Layton, who's a young doctor who works with us, has worked with the foundation, did a lovely piece of research. We're actually coming out in a science journal. It's online now. We'll send you a copy.
Oh, please do. Yeah, please do.
Which is a survey done that many of you will take part in. Really important. And what it says is that actually one of the reasons why, so far fewer doctors discuss the blood test, the alkaline phosphatase with people than we would like to do. Okay. So far fewer people do that. And one of the, but most patients would be happy to raise it. Okay. But they don't quite know what they're asking. So one of the pieces of work that we all need to do is just to help people understand the alk phos matters. 200 is what you're looking for. If it's above 200, you need to ask your doctor, what are you going to do about it? Okay. And I think that questioning is very important, and tracking it through the app, for example, is a very good thing to do. Below 200, that's very reassuring. So alkaline phosphatase, know your number, really important, own it. And as long as people have kind of, when they first saw you in the clinic, have checked out for other causes for it, it's a pretty good marker of PBC. The other one to watch out for is the bilirubin. That's the jaundice pigment. That's why people go jaundiced. And that can be elevated in PBC, but it's incredibly rare these days. So we see very few people with that, largely because of the benefits of treatment. And it only goes up in very severe disease to any significant degree. So to be clinically jaundiced is very unusual in PBC, and it's largely in people who are already there talking about transplant with their doctors. So in a sense, it's reassuring, although most people, we're intervening long before that comes along. So alkaline phosphatase is the most important, bilirubin a little bit. So those are the two really key ones. There are some variations around those themes, but that's the most important thing to look for. When you get your blood test, you'll often see them marked in red. Those are abnormal ones. The way in which statistics are done, an abnormal value, if you did 20 tests, then statistically one of those would lie outside the normal range, because that's how you calculate normal ranges. So doing, and people will be very familiar with a lot of the discussions about COVID testing in people in whom you aren't suspecting the disease. You have to be really careful about apparent findings in people for whom there was no reason to do the test, because this issue of false positives comes up. So if you're itchy or tired or mum's got PBC and you have a raised alkaline phosphatase, and your AMA is positive, that's very significant. But if it's just a raised alkaline phosphatase, it could be PBC, it could be something else, but it could be just that's your 1 in 20 test that is just a little bit elevated in you. So don't over worry when you see blood tests. Just to say, the alkaline phosphatase doesn't play any role in the disease. So if you were to give somebody a big dose of alkaline phosphatase into their blood, it wouldn't cause any damage. It's a marker. It's a marker rather than part of the problem. So we don't look to remove it by dialysis or something crazy like that, because it doesn't actually cause any damage. It's just a marker it's a bit like pain. It tells you something's going on. Okay.
That's really, really helpful. Good afternoon, Caroline, Mona, that have come in and said hello. Right, okay, so our next question is basically, as a belter actually, just a bit of background. This lady does not live in the UK, she lives in the States. She was diagnosed 5 years ago on the 90 with early stages PBC. Now they possibly say she doesn't have it because her blood is fine, but she's lost 50 pounds in weight. Well done. She's quit drinking, eating healthy, and she takes good care of herself. Our question is, once you're diagnosed, how can they say that I don't have it? My liver tests were high, AMA was positive when I was diagnosed, the biopsy was fine. What do you recommend I do? She was never given URSO. So thank you for your time and thank you for your kind response. So basically, she's been diagnosed with it. The woman's moved mountains to get herself in a healthy place, no doubt fat out of her liver and everything else, but she's never been given URSO, and now they're saying she's fine. So we see this in this country as well. So this answer, I think, is very relevant, David.
Okay. So let's reconstruct that and just correct me if I've got any of it wrong. So the first thing is alkaline sorry, I'm doing that. AMA. So AMA is the starting point with PBC. This is the antimitochondrial antibody. It's the antibody test, and it's the single reason why we can be why we can really get a handle on treatment of PBC, because it is, having said you get false positives and false negatives and things like that, the AMA test is one of those very rare tests that simply doesn't ever do that. So people with AMA in their blood are 95% likely to have something related to PBC going on, and 95% of people with PBC will have the antibody. So it's I always say it's a sort of £3 test, but it really tells you what's going on. If you look at it in compared to some other liver diseases, PSC as a classic example, you really don't have a simple diagnostic test. So there is no excuse at all for not clocking what's going on with PBC and starting treatment. So if somebody has got AMA, then they have something in the spectrum of PBC going on. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of people can have AMA, but actually no active PBC at this moment in time. If you were to do a liver biopsy on them, which we don't do anymore, but we did in the past, those people can have a very mild form of PBC. But we did a study in Newcastle here that looked at a group of those people over 20 years, and nobody went on to get significant PBC. A lot of people went on to develop abnormal blood tests, but nobody got cirrhosis, nobody got complications, nobody did a transplant, nobody died of PBC. So sometimes there's a very slow burning form of it where people are AMA positive and where they just get a very mild condition which doesn't progress into significant PBC. But AMA is usually suggesting there is something a little bit like that going on. So once you develop abnormal liver blood tests, once your ALK phos, as we've talked about, goes up in PBC, it very rarely gets better of its own accord. So that's important to say. PBC typically just doesn't just go away. Mm-hmm. And so what I would suspect, and it's very difficult to give individual advice, as people will caveat.
Yeah, sure.
If somebody phoned me up and gave me that story, what I would suspect is that actually the liver blood tests were, the ALK phos was elevated for another reason in somebody who was AMA positive. And it may well have been some fat deposition in the liver. And this lady has looked after herself, lost a lot of weight, taken the fat out of the liver, and the ALK phos has then gone down. So actually, there were two things going on, one of which is a PBC kind of spectrum thing with the AMA. The other of it was some fat in the liver. Healthy living's brought the fat down. So it's returned to a state where actually there is no PBC there. So that's what I would construct. If you are just AMA positive with a normal ALK phos, you don't need to start URSO. If you had an abnormal ALK phos, start URSO and the ALK phos returns to normal, you do not stop the URSO. You pat yourself on the back and congratulate yourself because you've responded well to the URSO. We occasionally had a little outbreak in the UK of people, Collette will remember this, being advised to stop URSO because blood tests return to normal. No, blood tests return to normal because of the treatment. It's a reason to continue. If you're on blood pressure treatments, you wouldn't stop them because your blood pressure returned to normal. You'd be pleased it was working. So in that situation, if you've got normal ALK phos and an AMA, that's great. There's no active PBC there. I suspect the weight loss has led to that. And of course, remember that fat deposition is very common. It's no more common in PBC than it is anybody else, but it can happen. and it will push up your ALK phos and other blood tests. So we are very live to that in the clinic. It's one of the things that we look for. One of the things that can come up on an ultrasound. So an ultrasound would be the first way to look at that. Does that make sense, Collette?
It makes perfect sense. So I was going to say to this lady, who I know reasonably well over the airwaves, is if you're concerned, and it's lovely that you've done so much yourself, it's great, you're my hero. But if you're concerned, why not? Because you can't do this in America. You can ask to have your AMA rerun, alkaline phosphatase and bilirubin, and you can give me a wee shout and we can take that further. But well done you, you're an inspiration to us all.
Just another point.
Yeah.
There are other causes for weight loss in the world, and there are other causes for weight loss in PBC.
Yeah.
And so we have what are called red flag signs as doctors. So bleeding, inappropriately is a red flag sign, but one of them is also weight loss. Now, and the first question you always ask is, has somebody tried to lose weight? So
she did.
Has somebody tried to lose weight? In which case, that's fine. If somebody hasn't tried to lose weight with PBC, then we would tend to think of one of the rarer, but we do see them absorption problems. So people to do with bile or to do with the pancreas can struggle to absorb food. Or the other one is celiac disease, which is commoner in PBC patients. So we just have a sort of mental alert. So anybody who's done spectacularly well in losing weight, just be aware that there is something that could be, giving it a helping hand. I have to say, everyone always worries about cancer. People do. That's human nature. I don't think I've ever seen a PBC patient who's lost weight, where an unexpected cancer is the cause of it. It's usually because they've actually been looking to lose weight, or it's because one of these absorptive problems. So although people worry about it, it tends not to be a particular problem.
That's a good add-on to know. And as you and I know, we're very successful weight watchers.
Can I just say, you're a much better chair than Robert. This is
looking as well.
Yeah. This is going so much better than it normally does.
That's because I don't understand what I'm asking you have to. He knows more than me. I don't need to know lots of things.
Learning point.
This is new to me. Now the question is, and somebody's saying here, and hi from me, Debbie. Hello, Debbie. I'll try and get everybody in. Are Campbell De Morgan spots associated in any way with PBC or liver problems? I don't know what Campbell De Morgan spots are. You will, I'm sure. You've got 10 seconds to answer. It's a yes or no.
No.
No. Right. Happy days.
Just a caveat. Can I not do? You're going on Robin now. So a Campbell De Morgan spot is like a little red, almost like looks a bit like a blood blister, but isn't.
Oh, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Those are Campbell De Morgan spots. And it's named after Dr. Campbell De Morgan.
Yeah.
People often confuse them with what are called spider nevi or liver spots. Spider nevi are, as the name suggests, they look like a tree from above, and you've got a vessel at the center and lots of little vessels coming out. Now they look completely different, but if you're not used to looking at red blobs on people's skin in liver disease, they don't look that different. And people often mistake the two. Now Campbell De Morgan spots are very common. Spider nevi are very unusual. But if you have got a red spot like that, and they're usually on the top half of the body, so they're usually around the chest area. If you have got a spot like that, just get a pencil and just very gently press on the center of it. If it's a spider nevus, the color will disappear. It won't with the Campbell De Morgan spot because it's in the skin, but it's a blood vessel coming up through the skin in the spider nevus. You press on it just very lightly, it will go completely white, and then you take the pressure off. You'll see the central dot go red, and then it will go ping like that. Okay. Now, if you've got spider nevi, they are never normal in men, but women can have up to 4 and it still be normal because they're driven by estrogen levels. So they're very common in pregnancy, for example. So they do not mean you've got liver disease. They do not mean you've got cirrhosis. They do not mean anything, but people worry about them. Just occasionally they're unsightly and they need a little injection into them. So it's one of those things where there's a mythology about it. So skin spots and diagnosing bad liver disease is a bit like chicken's entrails and looking at the bile.
Okay, right. We've got another question here. We've got a couple on the screen. We'll come to them. And this lady says, my fatigue has been particularly challenging for a while now. I had surgery 5 weeks ago and suspect this has had an impact. Absolutely. Is there anything I can do to help this, please? So maybe we could both say a bit on that, but absolutely you first, please.
Okay. So everybody having an operation or having a road traffic accident or being ill with something, there's a saying that we have that everything always ends up as liver disease. Okay, so it's a well-known hepatology saying. So if you have a big operation, no matter what the liver disease is, you have a big operation, then actually after the operation, you have a phase when you're getting over the operation, then you have a phase where the liver disease is made worse. It's very common. And you've seen it, I've seen it umpteen times over the years in PBC. Now, it doesn't make the disease worse. What it does is knock you more than it would do somebody else. And so you just take longer to recover, and it takes more of an effort to recover. So it's a very common thing. And we're asked all the time about operations for people with PBC. Are they safe? Are they not safe? So the answer is, if you've got cirrhosis, then you need to be aware of the risk and balance. So people with advanced cirrhosis need to be more cautious, but cancer surgery, absolutely no question at all. I wouldn't have cosmetic surgery, but cancer surgery, yes. If you haven't got cirrhosis, there is no issue at all, and surgery in general is always very safe. The other thing to remember is, particularly where people have had a general anaesthetic, is that it takes quite a long time for the anaesthetic to clear from the body. It takes a month for every hour of the anaesthetic is the rule of thumb, and you can probably double that with PBC. So if you had an anaesthetic 5 weeks ago and it was longer, anything other than a very short operation, you still got anaesthetic in your body, which contributes to why people feel rotten. And we love surgeons very much. I work with surgeons, and they contribute much to what we do, but they massively underestimate how long it takes people to get over operations. And they tell our people going for transplant, you'll be normal again in 6 weeks, and it's nonsense. It takes 6 months to a year. And so when you have an operation, anything over than half an hour's operation, anything with an anaesthetic, anywhere where they cut into the tummy particularly, will take you a while to get over it. And so there's usually no reason to worry if you feel a lot worse after an operation, because it's part of that. Now, you need to watch out for infections, you need to watch out for bleeding, depends on the type of operation. But I would normally reassure people, just watch and see. If people are on steroids, so small number of PBC patients are on steroids, you do need to boost the steroids over the operation. You don't need to boost urso or any other therapy. It's just part of what happens. But my dear surgical colleagues, they are wonderful people who do many good things, but they sometimes overestimate their prowess. At this point, I'll tell you all a joke. What's the difference between God and a surgeon? The answer is God doesn't think he's a surgeon. Okay?
Right, okay, very good. I would also say to this person, I hope you agree, David, be kind to yourself as well. And, get out for a walk. Don't be and going to bed. Movement helps everybody, no matter what pain you're in, what disease you have. Even cancer patients are told to move. Please believe that. We need to cover that some more at some point.
So it's really interesting. We're just not related to PBC at all. But I've been looking after this week a guy who ended up in ITU being ventilated for a week. Okay, young fit guy who's ventilated for a week and then came off the ITU. And he reckons he's lost half his leg muscle mass in a week. Okay, half of it.
Wow.
And so you what's called decondition very quickly. If you put a plaster on a leg, then the muscle mass disappears. So if you don't use your muscles, you feel they disappear, and then when you do use them, you feel very tired because they start to produce a lot of lactic acid when you exercise. So I 100% agree with Collette. Keep active, keep going. You don't hurt yourself. If you're tired after an operation, you don't hurt yourself by exercising, but don't continue, don't exhaust yourself, but keep pushing. And I always say to people after liver transplant, you will get out of hospital as quickly as you wish to.
Yeah.
But it's you, and you decide what you do and how you do it. There was a lovely girl who, ended up having transplant recently, quite young, and I said this to her, and then I kept seeing her doing laps of the hospital outside, and she'd taken it on board. That and it's about, 3/4 of a mile around our hospital site, and round and round and round she would go.
I've done the same myself in the car park of the Royal Family. But it's also worth saying as well, I don't know how old this lady is, but over the age of 60, your muscles do start to, what's the word I want? I mean, they decrease in volume. And you've got to work at keeping them moving, and that keeps your metabolic rate up to scratch, and it stops you or helps prevent you gain weight. But I would also say to this lady as well, good food, maybe homemade soups. If you don't feel you're able, see if the family makes some homemade lentil soup with a bit of a ham joint in it. But just watch it with the chocolate biscuits and things, the sugary stuff that you think is giving you energy, and it just won't. It'll deplete it even more. These things are really important when you're in any kind of recovery. So those are my comments on that. On the screen, do we need to have a low sodium diet, David?
Okay, right. So low sodium diets and liver are only ever applicable to some people with cirrhosis. So a PBC patient on average absolutely doesn't need a low sodium diet. You would only want to watch sodium intake if you have really bad cirrhosis. Having said that, I mean, without getting into boring detail, the way cirrhosis operates in PBC is very different to other liver diseases. And even in PBC cirrhosis, you don't particularly need to avoid sodium. Now, the doctor may have told you to have a low sodium diet if you've got high blood pressure, for example. That's a different matter. But in PBC, you absolutely don't need to have a low sodium diet. Often on the interweb, you'll find advice that you need to have a low protein diet in liver disease. That's nonsense as well. Even in cirrhosis, that's gone. The only dietary thing you need to be aware of in PBC is sometimes people can be a bit fat intolerant, and so you just need to watch your fat intake. It sometimes give you gripey pains, and so in a sense that there's nothing very much to say about diet other than a good balanced diet. Be aware that you can sometimes not feel hungry because of the drugs and things, so do watch your nutrition. Just if you are struggling with fat, it is part of the disease, and just take it a bit easy with that.
And animal fats are not good for anybody. A wee bit of olive oil with some balsamic vinegar in your salad or your veg is quite nice. Olive oil is great for your joints.
You come from the posh bit of Edinburgh, can't you? You know, nice little olive oil dips. Very nice.
From up the road.
It's Morningside, isn't it?
Morningside.
Morningside.
Near it.
Absolutely. For those of you not experts on Edinburgh, that's the prime of Miss Jean Brodie territory.
Massive screen, good for girls, something like that. Now we've got two questions on. I see we've got one on the screen about Fibroscan, fibromyalgia. So I'm going to come to that, and the second question. So I'm going to kind of roll them up. So would I ever need another fibrosis scan at any point? So I think the question is really, how often should you have them?
Yeah.
This coming on to, I have PBC and had a Fibroscan reading of 11. My Fibroscan 2 years ago was 9.8. My consultant is on long-term sex should be concerned with my results. Right, okay, we're going to keep that for the second bit. First part of the question, how often should we have a Fibroscan, David?
Right, so Fibroscan. So those people who are not familiar with it, this is relatively new technology, and it is a form of ultrasound. So everyone's familiar with ultrasound to take pictures of the liver. But this is, if you like, a measuring form of ultrasound. What it does, a bit like sonar, when you're searching for submarines, the probe sends out a ping, and it measures how much of the ping comes back. So it measures how solid the liver is, in simple terms. Now, the normal liver is very soft indeed, which is where we all learn to our cost, where people kind of fall off bikes and things, because that's how you damage your liver. So your liver is very soft normally, and so is not terribly rigid. It's quite fluid in its form. So the more scarring you have in the liver, the more solid it becomes, and until more of it returns. Simple as that. So and you know, in the old days on the railways, if railway workers wanted to know if a train was coming, they lie down and listen to the rails, because you could hear the sound transmitted by the rail much better than you could through the air. So solids transmit sound better than that. That's Fibroscan. Now, the value of Fibroscan is that it's very non-invasive. It's completely non-invasive, and therefore it's something you can do regularly. So in a sense, you can do Fibroscan on people where you wouldn't dream of wanting to do a biopsy. So it means that you can democratize information. Okay. So a lot of people say Fibroscan versus biopsy. Do remember that biopsy also gives you information about the nature of the disease process, which Fibroscan doesn't. Although Fibroscan is better than biopsy for scarring because it covers a larger area of the liver. So it isn't equivalent. It does give you very useful information. And the advantages, look at our clinic, we have it in the clinic. So if we're worried at all, we book people in for routine ones, but if you're worried at all, whiz you down the clinic corridor and we do a scan, reassure people there and then. So it's what's called a real-time investigation, which means that you can do it, get information in real time, which is therefore really helpful. Now, clearly, the other advantage, of course, is once you've got it, it's very cheap indeed. So once you've bought the machine, it doesn't cost you anything to do it. And of course, there is a learning curve for the people doing it. So it is better for the nurses. It's usually the nurses who do it to do lots of them because they get their skill level up. So a Fibroscan program is a very useful thing because you get better quality information in more people over more time. Mm-hmm. So what we would do routinely is scan everybody at the beginning when they first come to see us, and we would then scan people after that, depending on how things are doing. So we're moving towards scanning people every year, but at the moment we scan people between every year and every 5 years, depending exactly on what the disease looks like. And then we scan people in addition when they have any doubts about it. So it's good practice to repeat it every 2 to 3 years, or to then do it earlier than that if there is any concern at all about what's going on. 9 times out of 10, 95 times out of 100, Fibroscans are very reassuring. In fact, our commonest use is to reassure worried people, because people who are worried, people will say, what if the blood tests don't tell us what's going on? I've read on the internet that you can have cirrhosis and have normal blood tests, all of which is true. The answer, do a Fibroscan and it will reassure people. So it's a really good tool to stop people worrying. So normal blood test and a normal Fibroscan equals normal. So, and I wouldn't book a Fibroscan, an early Fibroscan in somebody I was worried they had advanced disease. I would do other tests, and so it says we don't surprise people like that. We use it as a reassuring tool, because you have to live your life, and if you're going home terrified about the disease, that gets in the way of your life. So in that sense, Fibroscan is a really useful test. The downsides of it, you do need to have the machine, you do need to have a certain skill level, and you do need to accept that sometimes rogue results will crop up. And anybody who's done a Fibroscan program will understand rogue results happen. They are usually almost exclusively an over-reporting. So I've never come across anybody who had significant scarring whose Fibroscan was very low, but I have come across people who've had high values but actually have had normal liver. So the secret to that is to just know about it and then to repeat it on another day, usually with another investigator. So I wouldn't worry about it. In terms of the numbers to watch out for, these are in PBC. So the French group did this, Raoul Poupon and Christophe Pourpechot have done a phenomenal amount of work on this, real pioneers in this space. So their numbers are the ones we use. Essentially, a normal liver has a, so this is the units are kilopascals, doesn't matter. So it's a standard number. So a normal liver is about 5, okay, and that's the sort of consistency of normal liver, right? A cirrhotic liver is above 18, right? And so what we see is some gradation in between all of that. So and somebody with a really bad cirrhosis, really aggressive disease, it will be 30 or 40, something like that. So that's a range you're looking for. So somebody with the 9 to 11 range, that's typical of somebody in kind of middle PBC. Some of the extracellularity is actually the disease, the liver's a bit swollen, so it can go up and down a little bit. So somebody, again, can't really get any I don't want to comment too much on individuals, but if I saw a value of 11, I just want to know the rest of the context. So it's not normal, it's not worrying, but what was it last year? What is it? And I just want to make sure that you are effectively treated. So it's in the place where I just want to have, if I saw a value like that coming through, I'd go straight to the bloods, look at straight to treatment. Are you on urso? Is it the right dose? Is your alk phos normal? Is there any value in second line therapy? So it would just flag it up for me. There is a drug trial coming along, and for those of you, many people on the call are very interested in the trials in PBC. We're about to enter into another period of a sort of golden age of new agents coming along in PBC, and I think one of these sessions we could usefully dedicate to the trials that are coming along and what they do. So brand new itch treatments, some of our work around the brain fog that people are aware of, but there are also some completely new approaches to treating PBC. And there is a drug, it's one of these impossible to understand code numbers, but it's with a company called Genkiatex or Calliditas, that they've just changed their name. And this drug is the first one ever to reverse Fibroscan change in PBC. Okay, it probably is complementary to all the other drugs that we use, but it drops, essentially it takes 4 points off people's Fibroscan score. So it's one of the things just to watch out for.
It's fantastic.
Yes, so we'll cover that at some point. James popped in about my result was 3.8. Can this get any worse?
Congratulations, great stuff.
Congratulations. You don't want any lower than that, because it means your liver's falling apart. That's a joke.
Fantastic result. Fantastic.
That's normal.
David, can we say at this point that when people out there say, no, I don't get Fibroscan scans, check with your consultant that they're not doing an ELF blood test, because the ELF blood test, some hospitals substitute for the Fibroscan. It's a very expensive test, 100 quid a pop. But that's, I suppose you could ask if you wanted a Fibroscan, but check that that's not being done. Yes,
that's a really good point. So ELF is essentially equivalent to Fibroscan, but you pay more, but we don't use it for one simple reason, is that.
Come back.
Or have I frozen? No.
Yeah, you don't use it for the simple reason.
You worry about the cost at the point of doing it.
Right.
Whereas with Fibroscan, you've worried at the cost up front and have got the machine, so there's no reason not to use it. And human nature is like that. And most people that benefit from these, with all due respect, if somebody's got bad cirrhosis, I can spot that when they walk through the door. I don't need a Fibroscan to do that. It is the people, in order to monitor, it is a test done regularly in people is the value. So I don't like something where you cost count about it. I think we are at a point where pretty much every sort of clinic that looks after liver disease patients will soon have access to Fibroscan, certainly in the UK. And I think we're getting to the point where everybody will have access to it, because it is such a useful test.
This lady whose question I have in front of me, who said 2 years ago it was 9.8, it's now 11. Now you have explained that's not a huge difference and it could flick back, but she goes on to say that her consultant is on long-term sick. So I would say to this lady, and I'm very sorry about your consultant's health. However, it is incumbent upon the hospital to look after you with your care. Now, I suspect you're not with one of the big liver units. I suggest you write to the department, or you can write to the chief executive of the hospital, or you can give me a ring and we can talk through it. David, is there anything you would add to that? Because you can't be left because your doctor's off sick. So you still need care.
So two answers to that. So the first is a 9.9 to 11 is not a meaningful change. Okay, that's within the errors of the test. So and the other thing people often say is, what about doing it more frequently? Do it every month. Well, the answer is disease doesn't change over that rate and time. So all you do is create noise. So that wouldn't worry us at all. That's not a meaningful change. Now, clearly, if it's 12 next year and 13 after that. It's a trend. It's like, so I always say to people, the more points you have on a graph, the more accurate the graph is. So those values don't worry me. The level that, 9 to 11 rather than 4 doesn't worry me, but I'm a perfectionist and I'd want to know, are we doing absolutely literally everything else that we can do? I've got an interesting fact that you don't know, Collette, literally, because I've just done the analysis now, is that people will be probably aware that there is a thing called the UK PBC national audit going on at the moment.
Yes, we've just written about it.
Yes. So this audit is the process by which doctors and nurses learn about how effective what you do is. And there has never been a big audit in PBC. And one of the things that Gideon and George and I have argued for, perfect, exactly, perfect. One of the things that Gideon, George and I and others have argued for is to do a national snapshot of PBC. And that has two effects. One is that and the guidelines, the UK guidelines, for the first time ever involved the patient groups. So Collette and Robert were involved in deriving the national guidelines for PBC. And for the first time ever, we came up with what are called audit standards. And we said 90% of people should be on urso therapy, blah, 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 blah. And the reason why you do that is that those then mean that people can audit their performance against it. Okay. Now, all doctors have to do audit as part of our professional continuing development. And if you haven't got any audit standards in PBC, you don't do audits in PBC and you go and do them in something else. And actually, having doctors look at what they do in PBC is good for them and it's good for PBC patients. Because of the second reason why audit matters, which is that it makes you think about what you do. So audit itself is a good way of improving practice because people don't like to realize they're not as good as they thought they were going to be. So actually the simplest way to get everybody onto urso is to ask people to collect how many people are on urso, because actually what you then find is that the people who weren't on urso mysteriously are then started on urso. Okay, so the audit has been launched. What I can say is that now this is not something for individual patients to get involved with. That's UK PBC, the project. So please do still join. That's very active. So the audit is done by doctors from their own clinical records. So it's happening in the background. We have just had the 4,000th set of records. It is quite extraordinary. I mean, quite extraordinary. Nothing like this has ever happened before. I absolutely take my hat off to the people who've driven it all, the younger doctors in all the hospitals. And we're now accumulating large numbers of hospitals that have got audit data on all of their patients. So 4,000. It is the biggest of clinical practice in PBC in the world, bar none, and it is amazing. And so from this we'll start, and it isn't finished yet, so it's running the calendar year 2021. So I think we'll get to 6,000 or 8,000. Amazing. So what this is starting to do is to tell us the state of the nation for PBC management in 2021. And what I can tell you, so just a couple of headlines, is that we've met the 90% plus getting therapy, so which is really good. So because that wasn't the case 10 years ago. It was So we've hit 91%. That's pretty good. So people are being treated. Now I think 11% of all PBC patients are taking something other than urso in addition to urso. That's bezafibrate or obeticholic acid. So we're really into the era of second line therapy adjusted around you as the individual and what you need, which is what this is all about. But I'm going to tell you a number which should be something that we collectively in the foundation get behind and argue, really challenge this. If you're sitting out there with blood tests that are not as good as they should be, above the 200 figure that we mentioned, your alt phos, you are 6 times as likely to be in that position because you haven't been considered for second line therapy than you are because you received second line therapy and it didn't work. 6 times as likely. Okay, so that tells us where we need to go. So 6 times as likely. So the problem for good control of PBC is people not getting not being considered for these therapies. And that's where we all need to get collectively angry and lobby. And that goes back to the point about your consultant on long-term sick. Absolutely, I'm sorry for him or her, but that's not good enough for you. And so you need to have an alternative arrangement. Particularly, I don't want to worry about the outpost that, the Fibroscan at that level, but it kind of needs being cared. Now, where we have in the UK, so 6 times as likely, take that number home, 6 times as likely to not be under control because you've not been considered for second line therapy than you are because the second line therapy hasn't worked. Okay, so I've got the number. I did the numbers today, got it in front of me. So across England, so I can't speak for other smaller nations around the place that hanging on the edge. Is that wrong? Is that a bad thing to say? Sorry.
No, it's a wonderful thing to say.
In England, there is a very coordinated system. So every hospital in England, every single hospital in England is involved in a network for delivering advanced care. So there are 22 centres, which are the ones that consider people and what the right therapy approach is. Okay, so everybody whose alkaline phosphatase is above 200 should be discussed in those settings. That doesn't mean you as a person need to go to the clinic, because all this information is based on blood tests and records. So 22 centres in the UK are there to consider second line therapies for people. Okay, so we run one in Newcastle, myself and Jess Dyson run it with Kath Houghton, our specialist nurse. So we discuss people, and this is about making sensible decisions. So not everybody whose alk phos is above 200 should get a betacolic acid or bezafibrate. There are risks as well as benefits, but everybody should be thought about and you're involved. Okay, so if you're in a hospital where they really can't manage you, either because they don't know what they're doing, or because the person who does it isn't there, and you've got a locum in who doesn't really understand this, you should be referred on to the whichever of those 22 centres is your nearest. Okay. So it's all completely worked out. There are maps, on the NHS England website that tell you this. So everywhere, and then there are 4 super centres, which are the big PBC centres, which is us, Birmingham, Cambridge, and the Royal Free. And if the 22 centres, they struggle with people with really complicated disease, then people tend to come on to which other of those centres it is. And then within all of that, we are the super centre for things like symptoms. So we see people from all over the country with symptoms. So there is always somewhere else in the network that can help manage you if you're not in Birmingham, Cambridge, London, or Newcastle.
It's worth saying, if you feel that you're not being looked after adequately, given everything you read and see and hear from us, go and see your GP, take somebody with you.
Yeah.
And ask to be referred. And if they say no, ask the reasons why.
Yeah.
And I think you'll find that you will be referred. And you can also say that these centres want you to attend, because this is where the research is going on. You have rights in this country about being permitted to be involved in research of the disease you may have. So that's the law of the land. And the other thing I would say to you, going back to the PBC audit, which is fantastic, I saw the figures the other day. Wonderful. Each of you, please, when you go to you have a telephone call consultation, ask if your clinic, your hospital is involved in the PBC UK audit.
Yes.
And if not, why not? And please remember, you are working in partnership with your team who are looking after you. It's not a case of the doctor will tell you and you just sit there and say yes and no. You work as a team, you make joint decisions, and if you want them to be involved, you have that right to ask, and you have a right to be told if that's not possible. And then you can bring that reason to us, and we can maybe, in a nice way, do something about it.
Yes, I'd echo that completely. And one of the things that slightly worries us is that the centres that, for whatever reason, have not taken part in the audit, I would worry that their care is not as good as those that have. Because people who are motivated enough to take part in the audit are usually motivated enough to care about what they do. And so, and I think it will be very interesting at the end of all of this, and there are different, time scales. So, one of the hospitals in the Northeast hasn't done it yet, but they're starting in 4 weeks' time when a new doctor starts. And so there are reasons why. it is still, only 2/3 of the way through. But where people don't take part in it, then it's sort of don't know, they don't know. And I think that is a sort of real worry. So if I had PBC, I wouldn't necessarily feel.
Come back.
He's back. But I would want to go to a hospital that cares enough to take part in the audit.
Right.
And there are certain things that we look for in terms of a high quality service, one of which is obviously a dedicated PBC or a PBC in autoimmune clinic is ideal. But is there a dedicated liver clinic, or is it a mixture of bowel conditions and liver disease? And I think the more.
While we're waiting on David, come back. Margaret, to answer your question, just put liver units to answer your question. Liver units, NHS on the website, and you'll get an answer to that. David, we've got stacks of questions coming in. Can we move on a wee bit? You all right with that? He's frozen. Oh, don't go, David. Come back. I don't know if David can hear me when we're frozen.
I can. It's America. So, as I said before, it's our university network. And after about 2 o'clock, people start doing web calls with America, so the internet always drops out.
Change it down. Right, I'm going to move on. I have PBC and AIH with cirrhosis, stabbing pains in the area of the liver, suffer the pains on the top and back lower neck, took in the morning. MRI showed fatty areas in liver and contracted and gallbladder. What should doctor be doing now? You had an endoscopy in 2018, so should these be regular? Yes, they should be. Everybody's a bit different. It's about 3 or 4 years for endoscopy, sometimes 2 if there's varices, or 1 if there's varices. But with this pain, what can you add to that, David?
So it's difficult. I mean, the thing about overlap, so the combination of PBC and autoimmune hepatitis. Can you hear me, Collette?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, right. So the combination of the two isn't challenging, but everyone's different with it. So the mix is different in everybody. So PBC itself is usually one of several different sort of flavors, as I talk about. Autoimmune hepatitis likewise, but the two, the combination can vary from person to person. And actually, that combination can vary within individuals. So one of the things that's more difficult to kind of generalize about, and that's important. So when you've got overlap, the first thing to say is, the first question I ask is it truly overlap? Because it's something that was overdiagnosed in the past. We now understand that there is a more aggressive form of PBC that can look like it. And I know it sounds like a nuanced difference. The question boils down to, if it's autoimmune hepatitis with PBC, then that needs steroid and other immunosuppressant therapy. If it's bad PBC, it needs a beta-cholic acid or a fibrate as an additional therapy. So it's not about whether you need additional therapy, it's about which additional therapy. So it is quite important to be as confident as you can about that. We often go back to original biopsies in order to do that. And if in doubt, this is one of the situations where doing a biopsy now is still useful to work out which treatments people should have right now. So getting overlap right is a big part of what we do in the clinic, and it has to be bespoke for individuals. We think in the past people have tended to be treated with steroids too much and not enough with second-line therapies. And I've certainly, a number of people I've managed where we have got them completely off steroids by starting a beta-cholic acid or bezafibrate. So remember, just because it's in your letters that you've got overlap and the doctor says that you've got overlap, the question is, when was that decision made, and has that decision been reviewed? And if it's longer ago than about 2 years, then it needs to be reviewed, because our understanding of the disease has changed in the last couple of years. That's a UK PBC thing, and it's something that the foundation and all of you out there who've taken part in our research can pat yourselves on the back, because that knowledge comes from the UK PBC project. Okay, so we've under-treated with second-line therapies, over-diagnosed overlap. Where people have cirrhosis, we are in the game of risk reduction. So if people have cirrhosis, it's very important to screen for varices and screen for liver cancers, because those are the complications that can develop. So Colette's absolutely right. Endoscopy every year, ultrasound every 6 months is standard practice. and you are more likely to develop overlap, statistically, more likely to develop cirrhosis with overlap statistically than if you don't have overlap. But that's because you're more likely to not be treated as well as you could be, because people rather miss the various nuances of it. So for me, it's the sort of thing where you should be heading more towards centres that are comfortable with it. And that sometimes isn't quite as obvious as people think it is. So it isn't Newcastle. It isn't Newcastle rather than Sunderland, for example, because Jess Dyson, who co-runs the clinic in Newcastle with me, does a day a week in Sunderland, sees all their complicated PBC patients.
So there's each clinic.
As simple as that. It's about, because there will be local arrangements to do this. So she sees a lot of Sunderland PBC patients in Sunderland because it's easier for them. But it's the same care, it's the same people using the same approaches. So I think you've got overlap, more reason to be involved in a centre that feels confident about it. So from the 180 DGHs to 22 centres to the 4 super centres, you should be heading towards the smaller numbers in that situation. It goes back to something that Collette said before about, do we want to know about people who aren't responding to therapy? As a liver transplant unit, we're going to have to pick up the pieces down the line. Every single liver transplant unit will tell you all the time, we would rather avoid people ever needing a transplant up front through early intervention.
100%.
100%. My personal mission is to never have to put another PBC patient forward for transplant, full stop, because we've got treatment better so they don't need it. So transplant units loathe nothing more than doing transplants, because in a sense it's a failure of therapy. So we do want to know about it, and honestly it's so easy to manage these things. In terms of the neck pain, it's very difficult to know. One of the things I would think about is sometimes you can get pains from the liver if the disease is active that can radiate through into the back and up into the neck. It could be that. The other one is if people have been on steroids, and this may be an issue. If people have been on steroids, particularly over a length of time, then you can get osteoporosis in the spine. And that sort of neck pain would make me think of a sort of nerve root type of pain. And the commonest reason for that would be steroid use and a bit of osteoporosis. So that's more difficult to comment about. But if it's a real sharp nerve pain, think about a nerve issue, and so it probably needs some imaging. The way to image necks and backs these days is with an MR scan. They're by far the best way to do it.
Okay, we've got a question on screen and a question in front of me, and actually we can kill two birds with one stone. I think here is how often should I have my blood test in the first year and reviews, and what happens after that? On my screen, I have here, lady was diagnosed with PBC 1.5 years ago.
Yeah.
Very, very happy with her. She was told, you come back in 6 months. She had abdominal pain, went to a different hepatologist. Everything's fine, but he said, we'll see you in a year. She's thinking 6 months, a year, what should it be? Newly diagnosed. It's normally, if you respond to her, so it's normally a year, isn't it? You would check the bloods every 6 months.
Yeah, so I think a new onset patient, what we would tend to do, all things being equal, and things are not equal at the moment with COVID and things. So good practice for us would be to see people at diagnosis. We have a saying, if it walks like ducks, a duck has feathers and quacks, it's probably a duck. So if somebody comes to us with a raised alkaline phosphatase and a raised AMA and an AMA, we wouldn't do what some people do, which is to keep checking the bloods for 6 months until you're confident. They would leave with a prescription. No sense in beating around the bush. You can always stop it down the line if you want to. So we would start people immediately. I would then tend to see them at 3 months, 6 months, and then a year. So the 3 month visit is just to see how you're doing, check there are any problems with it, to nip in the bud any issues. So you may want to change the dosing, change the frequency, etc. So that's just a nip and a tuck here. And at 3 and 6 months, you'd be starting to see a response to it. So the 6 months ones are the key ones. If people are not on a trajectory to get what you want, then you may want to see them a little bit before a year. But the 12-month one is the one where you formally decide whether people have responded or not. And what we need to have is a system whereby progressing through the system is automatic at 12 months. So there's an automatic visit, and you either continue with the URSO because it's working, or you go into the system for consideration of second-line therapy. It's too much. We're in a system at the moment where we tend to have to make the same decision each time, even though the decision should be automatic, because we shouldn't be going, should we measure the bloods at 12 months and then look at response? No, that's automatic. And people should, and even if the decision is, the recommendation is not to consider second-line therapy, it should be considered in people. So it's 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. After that, for us, the default is every year, and we bring people forwards. If they've either changed therapy, so we need to monitor around that, they've got cirrhosis, and we need to be aware of risk in that, or particularly if they're symptomatic and we're looking to evolve. So we'll bring that forwards from 12 months, depending on what we're needing to do. But if you are asymptomatic, well controlled, then it's 12 months. We tend we don't discharge anybody back to the GPs. Because unfortunately, this is a habit of falling apart in those settings. It does depend on the GP. A lot of the more rural GPs take on a lot more, and they're more confident with it. So there are really good GPs, but in our experience, it often falls apart. So we tend to see everybody forever and every 12 months. The way hospital systems work, it's more difficult to do it every 2 years, and they tend to drop out from our systems. So rightly or wrongly, 12 months. But I think most people, that's a confidence building thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's also a lot of, awareness raising. So there's a lot of reinforcing of messages, new research, people are interested in it, new opportunities to take part in research. So I think it's a way of updating people. So
that's fine.
Now, what about phone calls versus face visits? I think the COVID thing. So I think blood tests being done is very important. We are quite lucky with our GP services. They will tend to do blood tests, but I know not everybody is doing that. Somebody somewhere, Alkphos is, I'm afraid, everything. So somebody somewhere needs to do your blood tests, and that's increasingly going to mean people coming back to the hospitals, which is an issue. Phone visits, I think, are good for follow-up, where there's a relationship between the doctors, nurses, and the patients. So they're very convenient for people. If you're in the northeast of England, or in Scotland or whatever, people can have to travel huge distances. So if you're in the Western Isles, the liver units in Glasgow or Edinburgh, a phone visit or a teleconference is actually really good.
It's good enough, and it keeps you safe from COVID, the travelling, the going to hospitals, and everything.
I do think it's more difficult to build a relationship. If you don't know each other, it's more difficult. So, and then the other one is for the newer, younger doctors. They find it quite difficult because they're learning their skills. So it's not the answer. We should move everybody to phone visits. The answer is a mixed economy. It's interesting, we did a patient survey just to find out what people thought, and that's what they want. People often have quite strongly held views about it, but people want to have flexibility around it. But if we've got your blood test, they're normal, and it's just to check you're okay, and you live 4 hours away. And a 4-hour each way round trip is probably counterproductive. So I think the answer is flexibility, isn't it?
Okay, David, I've got a really important question here. It's a very, very good question. I'm having a problem with malabsorption. My gastro doctor has told me to stop URSO for a while. Is it quite common for URSO to cause malabsorption?
No.
And what do you think about being told to stop the URSO?
So URSO cannot cause malabsorption because of the way in which it works. So it's a bile acid in tablet form. Bile acids, so I'll rewind. So malabsorption is where you don't absorb the nutrients from your diet correctly, okay? So if you think about it, you eat, your deep fried Mars bar or whatever, if you're in Scotland.
Glasgow, not Edinburgh.
Okay. Morning, say. So if you think about it, actually being able to absorb food is an amazing feat of nature, and you need 3 bits to it. So the first is, so that food gets kind of minced up, you chew it, it goes into your stomach, acid helps break it down into this kind of soup, if you like, that then gets released into the small bowel. To absorb it, you need three things. You need to have a gut wall that's working normally, okay? You need to have a gut wall that's working normally, because a lot of the absorption is an active process. So a lot of the nutrients are actively carried into the body rather than kind of leaking across. And that's because you don't want bacteria to get across. So it's a smarter process. And so in celiac disease, there's a damage to the bowel wall, which means it doesn't work as well, and that's why you get malabsorption. So a bowel wall problem can give you malabsorption. The second thing you need is for your pancreas gland to produce juice that digests your food. So the pancreas essentially produces some enzymes. Lipase is the one people know about, which is a fat dissolving enzyme, which breaks up the molecules and makes them absorbable. So if your pancreas isn't working, then that can be a cause of poor absorption. And in PBC, your pancreas can dry up a little bit. So we know PBC is a kind of drying disease. Your bile isn't produced, your pancreas doesn't produce, your eyes, your tears are a bit dry. So PBC is a bit of a dry gland disease, and so pancreas can be a bit underactive in some people. It's one of the causes of weight loss. So people are pancreatically insufficient as part of their PBC. You don't have to look for any mysterious reason why the pancreas isn't working. It's part of PBC. And then the third thing you need is bile. So bile includes lots of things, including the bile acids, which are molecules which are detergents. So bile acid, in a sense, is like, Persil, whatever that is. It dissolves fat. So detergents essentially make fat soluble. Fat is normally insoluble. Detergents make it soluble. That's how detergents help you wash your clothes. But it's also how your body can absorb it. So you have fat in your diet. It goes through into your bowel and into the small bowel. The lipase comes out the pancreas, but it can't get to the fat unless the fat is soluble, and that's where you need the bile acid. So you need the fat goes into the bowel, you need the lipase from the pancreas, you need the bile acids from the liver, and it then chomps it up, and then you need the bowel wall to be working to absorb it. So malabsorption is where one or more components of that doesn't work. You've got malabsorption really for one of three reasons. One is you lose weight because you're not absorbing nutrients. Two, those nutrients that aren't being absorbed go through the bowel, and typically it's fat, and that leads to smelly poos, which are sort of often quite oily. And then the third is you often get what are called selective deficiencies. So, some of the things in your diet you need to absorb are more difficult to absorb than others, and so therefore you'll run out of those sooner. So iron deficiency is something that happens in celiac disease, for example. So 1, 2, or 3 of those things can happen. What urso is a bile acid, and we give it for 2 reasons. One is to function as a bile acid. So when you take it, it actually helps you absorb your food. And then the other is that it helps the liver have less damage to the bile duct. So it gets into your system. It works in the liver after being absorbed, but it also works in the gut. So all urso does is return to normal. It has no side effects. It is something our body naturally produces in low levels. So it has no side effects other than those that are predictable from it being a bile acid. The sickliness is because it's a bile acid, and bile acids are irritant. If you're vomiting bile, your stomach is very uncomfortable. So it's an effect that's predictable. So malabsorption, so it has no effect on the bowel wall at all, so it can't affect that. It probably has no effect at all on the pancreas, and it has a positive effect on bile, and so on average it will reduce malabsorption, although in most people the bile acid deficiency isn't the cause of the malabsorption. It will have no effect, or it will improve it. It, in a sense, can't make it worse. It can sometimes make the diarrhea a little bit worse because it can give you loose stools, but diarrhea is not the same as malabsorption. So I would be deeply dubious about that. Now, the answer is nothing in life is certain. And I think if you've got real problems with malabsorption, and you're scratching your head, then trying things is a reasonable thing to do. And I think it's a good question to ask, to what extent did starting and stopping urso have a timing that fitted with the malabsorption? So, if the malabsorption came on after you started the urso, and when you stopped the urso it got better, then regardless of what I think, that's your answer. But you need to just be cautious that people aren't putting two and two together and saying because loose stools were worse with it, that's a cause for it. So I think with urso, just remember as well, is that there are pretty much three groups of people with PBC. There are those people who take urso, but it doesn't work for them enough and they need additional therapy. Okay. There are people for whom urso has an important effect, takes them from high risk to low risk. And then the third group of people are those who, in all honesty, are low risk regardless of what you do. And so not everybody actually needs urso. So if you stop urso and your alk phos stays under 200, then all things being equal, you don't need the urso. So there's nothing harmful about stopping the urso for a while and seeing what happens, as long as the alk phos stays under control. So when people get a lot of side effects with alk, and this is why you'll never get 100% of people treated, because actually some of those 10% are people who don't need it, or the risk benefit is such that it's not worth them taking it. So it's a reasonable thing to do where you're getting problems. But if you're getting, if you've got high alk phos, perhaps a high bilirubin, bad malabsorption, that's the PBC or something linked to the PBC. That's not the urso. And I think you should be looking for different things. And I'd really want to be certain it's not celiac.
Okay, we've got 3 questions. This one's a very, very quick one. We've got 2 all in a few minutes.
I can go on till 1:30 if people want.
Who looks after people with pancreas problems? Is a gastroenterologist or a hepatologist or something else? It's a genuine question.
It's a really good question, and the answer is it varies very much from place to place.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew.
It varies very much from place to place. So in some hospitals, you've got nutrition people who would look after it. In some places, it would be the gastroenterologist because it's things like celiac that cause it, or Crohn's disease. Some places it would be the hepatologist, and some places you actually have what are called hepatobiliary people who look after it. And actually, coincidentally, I was talking to one of my colleagues today, who's a young surgeon who's really interested in pancreas problems and wants to set up a formal pancreas program. And I was saying, I think that's a really good idea, because this is a group of people who can often bounce from one doctor to another.
Yeah.
So for malabsorption problems, it will normally be the gastroenterologist, and it will normally be a gastroenterologist interested in nutrition. Mm-hmm. But it's the sort of thing where, again, you should be heading towards the bigger unit. So in a unit like ours, there are 3 autoimmune diseases. I mean, there's PBC. I mean, there are other liver diseases other than PBC, apparently, I gather, but not important. But joking apart, there's PBC, PSC, and autoimmune hepatitis. In Newcastle, each of those is looked after by a different consultant. That's before you get to alcoholic liver disease and hepatitis C and fatty liver disease and liver cancer. So we are super specialised. What that means is that we do nothing other than think about PBC and its various different issues. If you get into gastroenterology, the same thing is true. There are experts on colitis, experts on celiac, experts on nutrition, experts on bowel cancer and things like that. So generally speaking, you want to go to a centre where you've got specialist interest, because that's where you'll get the most expertise. One of the tensions we always have when you ask people where they want to be looked after, the answer is they want to have 2 things. They want to be local, and they want to have experts who understand their disease. The problem is in rarer things like PBC or malabsorption, it's difficult to have both of those, because where conditions are rarer, you need to see a certain number of them to become an expert. So you can't become an expert if you only see 2 or 3 people a year. Yeah. It doesn't work that way. So unfortunately, the rarer condition is you can either be seen locally, or unless you happen to live in the catchment area of an expert centre, you can be seen by an expert, and that's the tension always with it. And what we therefore need is, that's why our 170 to 22 to 4 system is a model for future approaches in the UK, to have a system whereby people can move through the system, so that you can be jointly managed by your local centre and an expert centre, using the knowledge from that, so that you're confident you're getting the best possible treatment without the inconvenience of having to move. And a lot of that will be digital platforms. And actually, one of the strange coincidences of COVID is that we have learned to use those pathway approaches much more. So one of our areas of research is not about clever new drugs or blood tests or whatever. It's about how to get treatments out to people in a particularly effective way. Yes. So it's one of those things where it's starting to be a bit what I would call tricksy, and it needs a little bit of deeper thought.
Okay, now we've got an interesting question here that's in 2 parts. The first part is going to be, well, I will answer that quite honestly. This lady's got Sjogren's syndrome. She takes pilocarpine to aid saliva, mouth space, and palatable. She's been told Jello Revoice lozenges are good. Have you heard of them? Just try them. Doesn't matter if you've heard of them, no, just try them. But the second part is a bit more distressing. My lips are swollen. I can't open my mouth fully, especially when at the dentist. This is terribly distressing. It feels like my lips will burst. Can Professor Jones offer advice, please? I have recently had blocked saliva glands and had to have antibiotics. Well, patient tips. I mean, I assume, I know this lady very well. She's lovely. That you're chewing gum, sugar-free gum, and sipping water and what have you. This is awful. David, is there anything you can suggest?
Yeah, so for most people, the swallowing problems are a nuisance and irritation, and often quite a significant nuisance and irritation, but not much beyond that. But like all of these things, same for eyes, is that you can get really bad problems with it. So where you've got really bad eye problems, it can cause corneal damage and everything else. So it becomes a problem in its own right. It's quite uncommon to get that with mouth, and the mouth is a much more complicated environment than the eye, because you get, lots of potential disease processes can be expressed in the mouth. So the first thing to say is, like all of these things, it's very important not to put 2 and 2 together and make 5. So we do see mouth problems with PBC. However, there are other mouth problems than those with PBC patients, and clearly PBC patients are not protected from getting other problems, if you like. So that's the first thing to say. When it's extreme like that, so if people have got a really distressing situation with it, then I would take a step, myself in the clinic would take a step back and just question everything. And just making sure there is not another cutaneous problem in the mouth would be very important. So lots of issues around mouth ulcers and things like that. So that would be my first caveat, is that that's a bit unusual. So it could be, but just take a step back. The second thing is that another thing the mouth does is obviously have a high bacterial load. So the ability to get bacterial infection in the mouth caused by the issues with poor saliva production is there. So a secondary infection, and it does sound potentially a little bit like that actually this has now got infected, and you've got, sublingual, you've got labial glands, and you can get those infected. So you've got big lips, it's possible you've got bacterial infection in the glands. Remember that saliva production is washing through the glands as well as producing saliva for your mouth. So it's a bit like a stagnant pond. You need to have a flow to keep these clean. So if there was an area that's exquisitely tender, that's localized, then the risk is that you've got a bacterial infection that needs treatment to control it. So if it's localized, then that's a possibility. To be quite honest, in this situation, if I saw somebody in the clinic, I would do 2 things. So the first is I would have a low threshold for a course of antibiotics to clear any infection, because there is no real test to look for that. And, you know, if you're confident there's an infection, you're going to treat it. And if you're not confident there's an infection, you need to be sure there's not an infection, so you're going to treat it. So the chances are you're going to treat it. It's just what I would do in the clinic. If that didn't work and there was a real problem, I would refer on to the oral surgeons. So because you're likely to need a biopsy of the tissue to work out exactly what's going on. So it's a highly specialized area. There are what are called oral surgeons. They are people who are dual trained dentists and medics. It's a very skilled area. And there will be a local, everyone has, again, a catchment area for a dental hospital. So depending on where you are, either in a big DGH or the teaching hospital, there will be a dental hospital, there will be oral surgeons. And they're the people who manage these mouth problems, so cancers in the mouth, inflammatory conditions in the mouth, and things that I would feel confident to deal with, and there are things where I think it needs an expert opinion, and that sort of thing. I'll get it. I refer tiny numbers of people, in particular, to the ophthalmologists. We have a very good ophthalmology. They do plugging of the tear ducts and things like that. And most people we manage, a small number of people we refer on. They get a really good service. And it works. It's about right. We send fewer people to the oral surgeons. There are fewer in the way of kind of obvious hacks that we could use. But I don't like to say refer somebody else in these conversations. But that would just ring not an alarm bell, but it's something that's not normal. And I would want to just clear any bacterial infection. And after that, I would look to get a biopsy to guide what you do.
Okay, can I just say something here? And this is really, really important for all those people out there who have Sjogren's syndrome, as I do, dry mouth and everything else. Now, I actually stated this, and James Newberger was so taken aback, he checked with his dentist, and it's true. If you are using chemical mouthwashes, stop it. Stop it. Get rid of them. Get them out of the bathroom cabinet, down the sink. They will not help you at all. Salt water, what Granny says about warm salt water, it's an antiseptic, it's an anesthetic. You cannot beat salt water in your mouth. You might think it was dry, it'll make me worse. It will cleanse your mouth. Cleanse your mouth. But chemical mouthwashes are one of the worst things on this planet. They do not help Sjogren's. They stain your teeth. They alter the chemical compounds in your saliva, and they can make things a whole lot worse. I was addicted to them. I didn't drink the stuff, but every hour I wanted to feel that freshness in my mouth. And my chemist, and I had bad Sjogren's, and when he realized what I was doing, salt water is the best cleanser you will get, and soother. But David, have you heard this before?
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. Unfortunately, mouth, brushing your teeth effectively is very important. Rinsing is very important, but unfortunately, mouthwash is really, really astringent. And what it does is it will change the microflora in your mouth, so it will imbalance it. And it will also have those chemical effects. So it seems like a great idea. It isn't.
No, it's the same as smoking as well. Smoking will change all the chemicals in your mouth. We've got one last question from Anna. Anna, I'm sorry you've had to wait, my friend. How long would you expect second-line therapy to reach optimum levels? I would say as a patient, immediately you probably would see something different. Wishful thinking, Anna.
No, all the trials are good. A really good question. All the trials are pretty consistent. Are that you have a rapid effect. So this is by second-line therapy. We mean a beta-cholic acid or fenofibrate or bezafibrate or one of the other drugs being trialed. So these are used in people who have had urso and have not responded as we would like them to respond to urso. So that's what we're talking about. So all the trials of all the drugs in all the settings show exactly the same pattern, which is you get a dramatic response over about 2 to 4 weeks. That then slows down from 4 to 8 weeks, slows down again from 8 to 12 weeks. And after 12 weeks, there's pretty much no change. And there are now quite long-term data for obeticholic acid in particular, up to 6 years, and it never changes. So the answer is 3 months. It is where you've got all of the changes. Now, the caveat with obeticholic acid in particular is that we often start people on a lower dose, titrate it upwards. So it's by 3 months is the point at which you would think about increasing the dose. And obviously it's 3 months after the last change is the definitive thing. Now, one of the things that we are increasingly thinking about is what you do in people who've taken, say, obeticholic acid and have not had the response to that you would want, or not as much response. And the answer is increasingly going to be to double up. So rather than swapping to bezafibrate, we would tend to add the two in. So if you've had obeticholic acid or bezafibrate and it hasn't worked as you would want, we tend to add the other one in rather than replacing it, because otherwise that's just in our experience. And our experience of what you call triple therapy is actually very good. So people have done very well with that, no problems with it. And of course, the added advantage is that if you have got any itch with obeticholic acid, then the bezafibrate knocks that on the head. So 3 months is the magic time point. But we are in the process of working out. Exactly exactly what we do next in various different situations. But remember, 11% of UK PBC patients are now on a second line therapy. So this is starting to become, and this is where GPs kind of not wanting to know anything about it, and DGH consultants not knowing anything about it. This is normal now. This is not research anymore. This is totally normal practice, standard practice. It's recommended by NICE. Everyone here is familiar with NICE. It's recommended standard practice. There needs to be a system whereby everybody gets into that system. It's not perfect at the moment, but it's normal practice. So if you're not getting that, you need to.
And this is something we'll plug from here. And this is the beauty.
That's not to say you must have second line therapy.
No, that's right. That's right.
It must be thought about.
But this is the beauty of doctors working with patient advocates as we are.
Yes.
This has been a great team. I mean, I've known David forever. Just interesting, you probably don't know this. Chris in the background, who's taken over from Robert. You met Chris nearly 30 years ago. He went to university in Newcastle. And so it was about 26 years ago, we did a bit of a conference here where you were, maybe 25 years ago or whatever. You knew him then when he was a student, and he's now an old man with no hair. So,
Collette, there must be some mistake. 25 years ago, I was still at school. I was in my teens.
All right. Wrong David Jones then. Wrong Prof. Right,
I couldn't possibly be that old. Not with my youthful looks.
But seriously, we have achieved so much. I mean, I'm told time and time again, PBC Foundation UK, globally, we're the people, and that's because of people like David, James Newberg, George Jones, etc., come on board and want to do this with you as your patients.
So I'm in a reflective mood. I literally started in PBC 30 years ago. 30 years ago on the 1st of September. Okay, so there you go, little factoid.
I've been diagnosed 27 years. How about that? Right. And my liver functions are better now than what it was.
Right. I started doing a PhD with Maggie Bassendine and Oliver James 30 years ago. Okay.
30 years.
So it's really interesting to reflect on where we are compared to where we were.
What a way we've come.
And we are light years ahead in terms of everything that we do. And we've got therapies, we understand the rhythm of the disease, we understand diagnosis, we understand symptoms, we understand priorities, we understand complications, we understand the frustrations, we understand the limitations of the system. We have a plan for everything. We haven't got all the answers, but we know the route to the answers, and we are working our way through it. So it's a sort of, and interestingly, there has been no miracle thing. So if you look at something like Helicobacter, the bacterium, you know, when 30 years ago, when I started in the PBC clinic, ulcers were a major problem. Discovering that 7 days of a triple therapy from your GP cures ulcers, it has made it go away. It's like a miracle treatment. We haven't had that, but what we have had is year on year on year on year improvement in what we do. So it is the long view which is very important, and it is the shared view of the clinicians, the patients, and it's the single voice. And I would echo those points completely. It is that advocacy, that we're all on the same page, that you hear about issues in some of these areas with patients and doctors being, you know, like that, and we have literally none of that. Now there are poor doctors out there, and we will not defend them, and we will deal with them. But within our professions. Now, interestingly, if you look at some of the other disease areas, if you look in liver disease, Hep C's had its own revolution in that time period. But you look at some other liver disease, they're still kind of in the departure lounge. And usually it's because they've not had this systematic approach to it. So anyone who thinks we're not making progress with PBC should get into a time machine.
Well, talk to me how it was when I was first diagnosed. And somebody said, first time I joined today, thanks to COVID, she's got COVID. Oh, I'm so sorry, and I hope you have a quick recovery. Chris, I hope you enjoyed today in the vaccines. Robert, we've said goodbye to Robert. I officially said goodbye to Robert yesterday. So I was teary, he was teary. And he's always going to be with us. He's
Robert who?
He's going to be an ambassador to the foundation. He's never going to leave us. I mean, after all, his mother's got PBC. How can he leave us? And he's been working very hard with Chris and bringing Chris up to speed. But as I've alluded to, Chris has always worked in the background for the last 25 years.
So just if any, I will have a final word on that. So I think Robert has done a truly phenomenal job. Yeah. So it's welcome to Chris. And we'll look forward to working together. Robert has made a phenomenal contribution. I think we should all thank him and applaud him for it. And Robert, and I'm going to embarrass him now. So all my Robert comments are just because he tells me to shut up all the time on these teleconferences. So for the first time ever, I can not be shut up by Robert, and it's great. Robert does two things, and I think he does two things, and he does those supremely well. So the first is the advocacy work, and things like the name change, getting moderately but politely angry on behalf of PBC patients. He pitches that moderately angry, and I think being totally passive and placid and saying no, if at all possible, could you do it a little bit better? Isn't enough. Getting totally angry but getting on people's case, and I think being visible and vocal about the patient's view of the world is really important. And I think the Robert's legacy is exemplified by the name change, which remains, and I've said this many times, the single most impressive example of patient advocacy I've ever come across. The second thing that many of you will know but a lot won't is the hard work he does on the ground, going round all the various different groups, local meetings, supporting local coordinators. And there are patient groups which are all about advocacy, all about websites, all about the big I am. It's the boots on the ground that make the national network. The reach of the PBC Foundation is truly extraordinary. Has the best reach of any organisation in the world, including the NHS, because it goes to places even the NHS really struggles. And so the power is that local organisation, that local viewpoint. And so that sometimes is less visible, although people in individual centres will do. So I think you collectively, should be very grateful to Robert for everything that he's done. And those two things are equally valuable.
Yeah.
Oh.
My husband was saying, what time to the vet? The vet was due at 3:20. You can get on my phone and try, sorry. Sorry, we've run over.
I knew the health service in Scotland was in trouble, but are you having to go to the vet now rather than the doctor?
My wee dog needs her glands done. This is the joys of working from home.
That's
David,
too much information, by the way.
I know, I should learn to do it myself. Never mind. But David, thank you for those kind remarks. Really, really grateful. I mean, Robert's done a great job, and he will stay with us. And it's great that he's helping Chris through it. And Chris has a different mindset, but I can promise you all he will be noticed. I mean, I'm their mother.
Yeah, it's a family trait. In a sense, BBC is noticed. I think one of the other, amazing things. I remember going to science meetings, and Robert will echo this. I remember going to science meetings where the PBC session at a science meeting would have 6 people in the room, and nobody was interested. And nowadays, you put a session on about PBC, you'll have 1,000 people in the room. So we have collectively got the attention of industry, we've got the attention of government, we've got the attention of
it's worth saying as well, David, that our first PBC research project was £125,540 we got from the lottery. How many years ago? I met David, so I went from Edinburgh to Berwick. Yes. David came up from Newcastle to Berwick. We sat in a pub, big envelope, and we put this thing together. We only had 48 hours to do it or so. We had to get it signed off and everything else by referees. And it was £128,540, and that created a 3-year project, the PBC 40, which is the quality of life markers, which is used around the world today still. Yeah. Remember that, David?
It's used all around the world. It's completely the standard thing, and it is why there are trials of symptom therapies in PBC, because it puts symptoms on the map. And I think it's people, ask me looking back, because I'm dangerously in heading towards Lifetime Achievement Award territory just before they pension me off. I'm really worried about it. Looking back at, what are the things I've done that have made a real difference? But in terms of game-changing thing, that was probably one of the most important things I ever did, because it made people focus on what the problems are, and it also at the same time gave them the tools to do something about it. Right. And one of the decisions that we made at the beginning, we're all in reflective mode, aren't we, was we decided to make it free. Okay, so the copyright's owned by the foundation. So a lot of doctors develop these things and charge people to use them. Okay, and we made it free. Okay? We made it free, and we made it free to encourage people to use it. So that people would look at symptoms. And 98% of all trials ever done in PBC have looked at symptoms as part of what they do. And that's not true of most liver diseases. So by making it free, you got people to use it. Yeah. The other bonus was that it means that because it's quite a lot of work to develop these things, why develop one if one exists and it's the one that everyone uses? So every single company in the world interested in doing PBC trials rings me up and says, can we use the PBC 40? To which the answer is yes, it's there to be used. We did it so it would encourage you. And by the way, what's your drug, and do you want to bring it to the UK? So every single trial of a drug in the UK, every trial in the world in PBC comes to the UK because of that. And we don't do all of them, but it means that UK patients.
Oh, he's frozen. Come back, David.
In Berwick-on-Tweed and developed the quality of life measure. And I had that. We were talking about pancreas earlier, and I had that conversation with one of my colleagues, and he wants to set up a pancreas service, look at symptoms, to look at treating the disease, to do all the things we've done. He said, "What's your one bit of advice?" And I said, "Develop a quality of life measure."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you feel a second book coming on, David? Thank you so much for joining us. We always have fun when you're here. Not that we don't have fun, and you give such detail to the answers to the questions, and people value it hugely. And don't forget, we're storing these in YouTube. Robert's cataloguing them all now.
Oh my God! Every time I'm rude about Scotland, it's going to be stored on YouTube.
We're having a PBC TV channel, by the way.
Just an official caveat, remember, very difficult for me to give advice, and I shouldn't give advice about individual people's case. However, I want people to give my thoughts. So I've always been very careful. This is what I would do in this situation. But always discuss it with your own doctor. However, don't be satisfied with second best. So it's very difficult. We only ever get a small portion of the story with all of this. But if in doubt, don't die or have a poor quality of life by being polite.
Absolutely. Get in touch with us and we'll help you in your journey.
Our American cousins are much better at this. If they don't like the care they're getting, they sort it out and they, go somewhere else. And I think in the UK, we have we are very fortunate that around the country we have a network of very good people who care about this. And entirely coincidentally, the whole London, Liverpool, Manchester, the distribution of centres that are good at this is entirely random, but actually covers the country. So there is somebody pretty much within 100 miles of anybody anywhere in the country who cares about PBC. And, that isn't the case for all diseases. If people, I frequently get asked, I live in, Chipping Sodbury, who should I go and see? I'm really happy to give that advice. So I can give you a name. I know I've had a couple of emails in the last week about people going to see somebody, and what I will do is I'll always suggest somebody who knows what they're talking about and somebody who cares. And so so there is a network of really good people around.
Absolutely, just the best. So I'm going to say goodbye, David, and thank you. I'll see you, I think, in a few weeks. Gentlemen in the background have done a sterling job. Chris actually gave me some PBC questions. We haven't asked one of them. We will next time. So thank you very much, Robert. As always, grateful for your
So the final comment for me, for those of you who are new to this session, I think these are useful and people are very kind in what they say about it. Yeah. B, I enjoy it immensely. This is the highlight of my month doing this.
He does, and we're storing them all. They can all be.
Yeah, as people can detect. But this came about because I did a standard talk in one of these sessions, and we had half an hour of questions, and by the end we had more questions than we had at the beginning. And so we've been running monthly Q&A sessions ever since, and we still haven't even scratched the surface of the questions.
I know. I must produce some numbers. I'll do it for the trustees.
Every single time. The questions are brilliant, as they were today. They're really, really good questions. And I use them as pegs to kind of, explain, rather than just give a yes or no, just even in short answer. The short answers, please, bits. It's useful to unpack it so that people kind of understand.
Well, that's right. No, it is important. So I would say to everybody, please keep sending us donations. No, nobody's giving us any money. Please, please, please keep that up if you want these services to continue. Keep well. Don't hesitate to contact us if you need us. David, hope it's not too long till next time. And gentlemen in the background, good afternoon to you all. I'm away to see to my dog. Okay. Bye, everybody. Bye.